You're listening to the Certified Personal Trainer Podcast, a show by personal trainers for personal trainers. It's time to become a better trainer, get more clients, and change more lives.
Thanks for being here. We're going to be talking a little bit about social media today, and it stems from the questions that we get via email, via phone, via our mentorship around the ongoing struggle of knowing how the heck to utilize social media to your advantage. We find that the community oftentimes around social media marketing, like even when I hear that term, it kind of rubs me the wrong way a little bit. I don't have positive associations with it. And I feel like, especially as fitness professionals, we're not really getting into the field to be salespeople. We're not really getting into the field to be content creators or to, have most of our job be selling people. But at the same time, as we talked about 2 weeks ago in our wider kind of sales webinar, and we're sort of getting more narrow here with this week's webinar, if you want to have a sustainable career as a personal trainer, having a baseline understanding of sales and buyer psychology is, maybe a necessity. I was going to say it's very helpful, but I think if you want to be a trainer long-term, it's a necessity. The only situation where it's not is if you have your clients that are being fed to you by a gym or whatever it may be. But a lot of trainers have a desire to go an independent route and to work for themselves, or to, at some point, try to get their own clients and sustain their own business and not always be tied to a gym. And if that's the case, then it's an absolute necessity to have a baseline understanding of these things. And so when we think about sales, the next kind of one step down the pyramid is, okay, well, if we know that we need to, be reaching people, we need to be getting in front of prospects, we need to be putting ourselves out there and building relationships. Oftentimes a very natural avenue to do that is via social media. It's not the only way, of course, but it is a prominent way. And there's just a lot of complicated advice out there, and there's a lot of systems, and there's a lot of tools and templates, and it's confusing and complicated for a lot of people, especially, again, because we did not enter this field to figure this stuff out. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. All right, let's talk about some key perspectives here, many of which we have talked about before on previous webinars, which hopefully those are some principles to take away. So, but they're especially true for marketing, because, guys, we are in a service-based business. Oftentimes we are running stuff by ourselves. And if we are in a service-based business that we're running by ourselves, the relationships that we build with people are going to be, should be, the foundation of our business and our clientele. And if that's the case, how you build relationships with people effectively and authentically has to be rooted in individuality for you. And so that leads to this first point of it's not as helpful to look at a tactic or to look at what somebody else is doing and just copy it for yourself. It's a slippery slope. The power of a lot of this is in the principles. What was the box that they were trying to check? Okay, this post went viral for this person, or wow, this post made a lot of sales for this trainer, as opposed to copy pasting or just using their words or whatever it may be, using a similar image. Don't copy paste people's content, but theoretically copy pasting. Think about why that worked, and how could you manifest that same principle in your own situation? And by the way, guys, Matt here is our social media expert, so we'll be leaning a lot on him. You can follow him on Instagram as well, and we'll be dissecting some of his pieces of content, since he is our resident expert here. But
I appreciate that. And I don't accept fully, to be honest. But I think
now you're famous, just accept it.
No, not at all.
So humble.
I do enjoy, it's love-hate with social media, to be 100% honest. And I think that that actually explains one of my biggest tips, which I think we'll get into, is just like social media is going to be an up and down battle. It's the same thing with client work, right? It's the same thing with life in general. Like, you're just going to have to be able to ride the wave and continuously do your best in spite of potentially not getting the best outcomes that match your efforts, right? Like, you can be working really hard, you can be thinking that you're putting out amazing content, and the results don't just kind of show for it. And so only a select few can really grind that out and continuously push through, and to actually see the fruits of their labor pay off. But I think if you do spend that time, it's worth it. And I think that one of the best ways to do that is to actually figure out a way to bias it more towards loving it than hating it. It's just kind of one of those things that you can get out of it what you put in. And I think if you continuously try and just see it as a platform to be social and be fun and to spread your message to your people, and not overcomplicate it too much, at least, especially in the beginning. It's like worrying about optimizing things and stuff is probably a fool's game, because you don't even know like what the area of optimal entails. And so it's just like, instead, follow your strengths, follow your curiosities, and follow what's fun, because at least if it doesn't perform well, you enjoyed making it in the process. And I think that there's something to be said there, for sure. So yeah, I think that's going to be the first thing that I say with it.
And that will bleed through as well. If you hate it, that will also bleed
100%.
through in your content. And if you have a good time and you actually enjoy doing this, that will also be infectious.
Yes.
I also hope that you guys are noticing the similarities between what Matt just said and like with social media and fitness. Same exact thinking. If we have a brand new client, are we going to be worried about whether they're doing a stationary lunge or a Bulgarian split squat? Nah, probably not. I mean, we'll choose the easier one, right? Like that's a decision that's not, we're focusing on, let's get them to come back to the gym again the next session and they don't dread it. That's a lot of, when you're just starting on social, that's a lot of the goal, is to like find some type of habit or path where you don't dread it and you enjoy it. And you feel like, and like Matt said, you're sharing your message for your people. We don't have to impress anyone. Cool. So let's start with platform. In fact, this is actually, we added this in because of how often it's asked, but it's actually, it can be a very fast decision. It doesn't need to be a multi-week process. And there's some filters that we'll run through and principles to understand. So one is each platform treats content a little bit differently and favors certain strengths and delivery methods, right? This is likely a given, so if you are fantastic on video, and love being in front of people, primarily trying to write text-based posts on Facebook could be a tough path, for like your primary platform. YouTube and TikTok probably makes a lot more sense, as a primary platform to focus on. So one, be aware of how each platform treats their content. What types of content do they favor? If you're fantastic visually and you like building on the visual front, Instagram or even Pinterest, like that, putting your efforts there can make a lot of sense. So one, think about, where do your strengths lie? What do you enjoy in terms of like, how do you like to deliver information? What medium is natural to you? What do you like doing? Start there. And by the way, if you already are on like a main platform, like we get a lot of questions that's like, well, I'm mainly on Instagram. Do I really have to like go and make all these platforms? No, just keep doing it on that. If you've already started down a path for these platforms, great. One, most of your audience is probably there anyway, which is an important piece. 2, you're already familiar. You've already been using it. You've started to build some reputation there. Just keep going with that. That's totally fine. So don't overthink this step too much. Choose one as a main focus. So like based on what we just talked about. And then you do want to syndicate your content across each platform, because it's an opportunity that is for the work, the effort, the input, the output is worth it. The reward you get is much larger than the effort it takes, because you already have the piece of content made. What you don't want to do is make one piece of content for YouTube or whatever it may be, and then post the identical piece of content across every single platform. Because again, we have to remember each platform treats content a little bit differently. So if we are focusing on one platform, which is good, and we build one post for that platform and we copy paste it to every single platform, it's worth it, but we're not respecting the medium that we're posting this platform on. Like for instance, I am much more of a writer than somebody on video. And so I use Facebook as my primary platform. I build my content. It's longish form, or honestly, my blog on my website. It's either Facebook or my blog where I can write long form content. But I want to syndicate all of that onto other platforms. And so maybe I'll film 120-second video of like the main points from that content and splice it up and post it. I'll make one graphic when I post it on social media. So there's certain things that you have to do to each piece of content to make it suit the platform. But once you have that content, it's relatively simple. But Matt, I'm curious your thoughts on syndicating content and also just like helping folks here wrap their minds around how to go about choosing a platform.
Yeah. I think that this obviously becomes even easier over time too, because not only are you able to, take one piece of content and turn it into 5 different pieces of content, you're able to analyze what worked best over time. So you actually have a strategy as opposed to just kind of like posting and hoping. After you start to post, several different pieces of content, you can gauge the responses. You can gauge how many client applications you got. You can gauge the actual engagement with that, right? Like how many comments and things, like what are people interested in? I think that's really important too. And I think that finding little ways, each platform has, I feel like, a little bit of way of doing this. But so for example, it's like on Instagram, you can put things in your stories. You can put little bite-sized pieces of content in your stories, and then you can gauge how many people message you about that thing. Or if you have some type of like poll or a scale or something, right? And you get questions about it or something, it's like, or that's going to be something that may be worthwhile to blow up into a bigger piece of content, right? So it's kind of like post a little something to see how much engagement you get from it. And then if it goes over well, then you can put that into a bigger piece of content, like an email, or a blog post or a podcast or a video or something along those lines. I think Twitter is also excellent for this. Twitter, you can put out, 20 tweets a day and no one really cares, right? Like in the sense of you can put out 20 pieces of content just to test. Like that's how you can test ideas very quickly. But yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways to do this, but it's pretty straightforward whenever you get the idea. It's just like, how can you take one big piece of content and make it into a bunch of smaller ones? Or how can you take one small piece of content and blow it up into something even bigger? Yeah. And yeah, I think that's the main gist here. It's just working smarter instead of harder.
Yeah. And usually it's the former. Usually you likely have so much more content at your disposal than you think you have right now. Like there's times when I'm like, oh, I wrote this blog post a couple years ago. I love it. It still applies. That can turn into 5 Instagram posts for me, because I will break it down and I'm like, great, I don't have to think of ideas. I just need to like syndicate it. I need to reshape this content to fit this platform. Or like I screenshot my blogs and I post it on my story, and I use a funny picture of my dog and blah blah. I'm like, that's a much better way of letting my Instagram followers know that I have a blog than like linking the blog and hoping they read it, because that's not respecting the platform. No one's going to do that. Some people might, but if you're on Instagram, that's not why you're there. You're probably not going to click on a link and read a 1,000-word blog or whatever. But you might like a funny image. We have to meet people where they are. But so let's just use an example. Let's say you're a better visual creator than writer, love to be on video. You have chosen to focus on Instagram. You make this post, and this is a post from Matt from his Instagram, well designed. How can you syndicate it, right? So if you're on video, maybe on Facebook, you pull the transcript. So now you have your video in written form, and boom.
Yeah. Also, just on that note, something to think about too is if you're going to, you need to make it native to the platform, but also like if you write out an email, for example, or write out a blog post, it can be helpful to, of course, you can drive people to that blog post, but the thing is that typically these platforms will quote unquote punish you for putting links because it's taking people away from the platform. So it's like, if you've ever posted a link in your story, you might notice that some of your views and things can drop, which of course is a double-edged sword, because it's like, maybe the people that you want to see it are already going to see it anyway. They're going to be driven there. It's just something to consider. And so what I was saying is you can chop that up and figure out how to tell that same story, except do it on your stories or do it on Facebook or do it on whatever without actually linking it out. But you've already done the hard work of figuring out the idea and fleshing it out. Now you just have to repurpose it as a TikTok video or like, something like that. You've already written the script for the video. Now you just say it on TikTok, right? And just get in good lighting, boom, and you're done. And that's kind of one of the points that I was making is, so how I just said to take it a step further after you have a decent amount of library of content, which ones perform better and which ones perform worse. Well, you not only can take the ones that perform better and like repost them, but also it's like, how can you take your best pieces of content and then say them in a different way? So how can you say the same thing 5 different ways? How can you tell a story about it, right? From your own personal experience, tell a story about it with your clients. How can you take a contrarian view at it, right? How can you make it a listicle? Like how there's so many different ways that you can take one piece of content that is proven to work, right? Because it's gotten good feedback in the past, and then you can just say it a different way, right? And so that's how you'll find these certain people. So I think Jordan Syatt is a really good example. He's saying the same stuff over and over and over and over again. He's just using, different wigs because he tries to go the comedic route, the comedic route, like he tries to be more entertaining. He does it through a TikTok. He does it through some other different medium or a different way of saying it. But he has a couple of these big overarching principles. And then, he has 5 big overarching principles, and then he can just say them in so many different ways. And I think that will give you tons of different ideas for content. And then the second thing that I was going to say is that if you're training clients, whether in person or online, you're going to have content every day, or at least every week, right? Because I have clients that check in with me every single week. I'm coaching them. It's like, what better, like, as far as a sample size to use than the people who have already paid you to work with you and are currently working with you. They ask questions about certain things. They use certain language, right? It's like you take that and then you turn it into a social media post, right? It's like you're already doing the meat of the work, which is like what we talked about. Is like, we don't love to market or sell or anything like that. It's like, cool, but you're already doing this work. So you can even just be objective. You can just be like, hey, so-and-so asked me about this today, and like, here was my response to them. Here's how you apply it to yourself. And then you can put a simple call to action. Like, if you want help like this too, then fill out the application in my bio or whatever it is. But just like, there's so much stuff right in front of you. Don't think that you have to go through this big ideation phase and get inspired and all this stuff. It's more so just like, look at what you're already doing and what you've already done. And I think that
Yes.
that'll help a lot.
We don't need it. It doesn't need to be so complicated. And it's such a good point. And we'll get into content shortly, but it's the document versus create mentality. Just focus more on documentation than creation. It's a very challenging mentality to be in to if we want to build content that resonates with people and that showcases who we are and helps build relationships, things of that nature. It's very challenging to do that if each time we sit down and try to do it, we're like, all right, what am I going to build today? What am I going to write that's going to resonate with people? Whenever I get in that mentality, and I'm sure we all have here, when we post on social media, I come up with nothing. I try so hard to how can I take an old post and blah blah blah, and I'm like, it's nothing comes to me. And then when I document my experiences, there's times when I read a Facebook post that I so hardcore disagree with, and then instead of just thinking in my head, I just write it down. I make a post in 2 minutes, and it's amazing, and everybody loves it, and it outperforms posts that I spend 2 days on, because I'm trying so hard to think of something good to post. And it works sometimes, but the vast majority of the time it does not work. And what works much more of the time for me is pulling back the curtain into my life and documenting, whether it's with clients, whenever I wrap up with a client or a project or whatever it may be, I write about it. And people who don't care aren't going to care anyway. And it always gets leads and clients because I'm highlighting what I'm doing. I'm showcasing my personality, showing that I am authority and an expert, things of that nature. And I'm really just documenting my experiences. So this can be the case with yourself. Document your own journey. If you had a revelation, it's very boring to post the same stuff that everybody else posts. A really good way to separate yourself is to understand that there's only one you in this entire world. There's only one person who has lived your exact life and walked in your shoes. Layer that into the advice that you give. Don't just say eat more vegetables. Showcase why you used to hate vegetables and how did you overcome that, and what was that journey, and then show how readers can apply what you learned to their own situation, but have it be from the root of here was my journey with this topic. Here's how you can also overcome this, or whatever it may be, but start there. Such a good point, man.
I think another quick tactic that you reminded me of was the idea of, I actually have a notes in my phone, just on the notes app. It just says ideas at the top, and it's just a bunch of bullets. And so a rebuttal to what I was saying about using clients or whatever is that whenever I'm doing my client updates, it's I'm not also thinking of content, right? I'm trying to solve the problem for the client. But what I can do is simply either if I have the idea, I'll just write that down in my notes app and then just continue working, or I'll even just take a quick screenshot of it on my laptop. And then I know it just it's just going to save that screenshot, and I know that captures it, and then I can continue working, and then I can use that idea later on, right? Or if you're working with a client or something on the gym floor, it would take you 2 seconds. And I don't think any client in the world would be if you're hey, you just give me a great idea for a piece of content that I'm going to write later, give me 2 seconds. I'm going to write 1 sentence in my notes, and then I'm going to put my phone away. If you have your phone, I don't even know, but it's just, you can do things asynchronously. You can take a picture of your meal and then post about it later. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to be on your phone making the post at the same time.
Yeah.
Right? You can, as soon as you get an idea, just capture it, and then you can always post it later. If you want to take a video so that you have it, and then you can post it later. You don't have to do them both at the same time. So I think that sounds so simple whenever you say it out loud, but a lot of people feel compelled to post it as soon as they do it. And that's not always the case. It's just just document it, and then you can figure out what to do with it later on.
Totally. Yeah, totally. And we're going to get into content, I believe. Yes. But just to we're going to talk about Matt's content kind of is what we use as examples. Such a good, what's your handle, Matt? Matt McLeod 6?
At Matt McLeod 6. So
check his it's such a good example of utilizing different types of content, being authentic, obviously respecting the platform. He only posts on Instagram, right? For the most part, and a podcast.
Yeah, they're in my email list.
And the email list. It's just it's such a good example of how to utilize personal content. And like it's what fuels his business and why he's been a complete solo online trainer for well over 5 years. So
yeah, and I think they'll realize it too, depending on what your own beliefs and things are. Is like I'm definitely not the status quo with lots of the stuff that I post.
Right.
So and that's not me just being a contrarian. That's just me being myself and being opinionated on certain things. And I know that it's going to start up engagement and stuff, but it's actually what I believe in. And so I think that is another way that I differentiate myself, is that, and I'm not saying that you have to post exactly like I do, but I think it's more so being yourself and not being afraid to take sides or speak your mind or something like that on certain things. So yeah.
If you tried to post like Matt, it wouldn't work because you're not him. So it just would not work. But again, how can we post like Matt, which I try to post like Matt in the sense that I try to be unabashedly myself and lean into my authenticity. That's posting like Matt. It's not making this post.
Right.
You know,
you can get inspired. There's a bunch of people that I get inspired from, it's just like that. It's kind of, I've joked around about having like a round table of people in my head, like before I post something. And that's been very true. Like it's lesser and lesser now since I've found more of my style, my taste, and my own credibility and that kind of stuff. But like growing up, like, yeah, getting into my business more and more, especially in the beginning, there was quite a few people who I would go through filters. I would be like, what would this person think? What would this person think? What would this person, not in the sense of like diminishing what I think. It's more so just like keeping myself in check based off of all these people who I respect and value. And it's like, I see myself aspiring to be like them. And so I want my content to kind of reflect that as well, not in an inauthentic way. And again, like you said, not stealing exactly what they're doing. But it's like one of the best things that my mentor told me. It's like, I don't want you to do what I'm doing. I want you to see how I see. And I think that's the key, is like you follow these people, you see how they see. And with that, that's how you can develop taste in your own, like what it is. It's just like a guy messaged me the other day about one of my stories. He's like, how do you get it so whatever? I'm like, I don't know, dude, it just looks good. And I'm just like, I don't know how to teach that. I was like, I don't know. I was like, follow more photographers maybe. I don't know. So like genuinely, I think that's what happens, is like I follow these certain people, and it just iterates on what you think is good or bad. And it's like, that's why my content from years ago, I'm like, what the heck was I doing? And now it's like, hopefully in another year, I'm like, what the heck was I doing? Right. Like that establishes growth. And so
totally.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Yeah. As a random aside, but who you follow is also important, as Matt said. that will also shape a lot of your perspective, depending how much time you spend on social.
Yes.
Be considerate about that.
Don't
be afraid to do that.
I live out my message, right? Like that's what makes the message easy, is because I live it out every day, right? And so I think that fitness is it's the bedrock, it's the core, it's the glue that holds together a lot of different things in my life. And so, but that doesn't mean that it comes first over my entire life, right? It's the thing that I've said since probably the very beginning, is that I use fitness to enhance my life and not be my life. And so that's just what I've always lived out. And so that's kind of given me permission to talk about things outside of fitness, and also gives people insight into who I am. And that gives me differentiators from other coaches. And I think going back to who you follow and the stuff that you consume as well, like if you guys want a practical tip on this, it's like, of course I follow so much fitness stuff that I, through osmosis and through just like having that on my feed and things, I see it. I see my peers work and my friends work and things like that. But also in developing your own style and taste, it's like, look at the non-fitness accounts that you're following. right? So mine is more like, it could be stuff about style, or like about fashion, or about interior design, or it could be writers, it could be podcasters, it could be stand-up comedy, all these different things are still part of who I am. And so I'm able to relate to people on so many things outside of fitness. And it's like, if you have a fitness person that you've been, or if somebody is following you and they see you as the fitness person, then also they're very much into stand-up comedy. And then now you start talking about stand-up comedy. It's like, that's something that now not only are you relatable in one area, like they look up to you in the fitness side of things, but also you guys can talk about the stand-up comedy side of things. And I think that relatability, it goes back to the old adage of people don't buy coaching, they buy coaches. And I think that's the biggest thing. It's like, why are they going to buy you? Why are they going to buy you over me? It's like, maybe you're into knitting or something and I'm not, and you have good fitness info, I have good fitness info, but because you're into knitting and they want to also relate to you on that, they're going to sign up with you instead of me. Right. So don't always think that it's just contained to just fitness content.
Yeah. It's not always a competition of like, how can I post the most accurate fitness content out there to compete with all the other people posting accurate fitness content out there?
Exactly.
Not going to work.
Unless you're a PhD and like a scientist and you can go there with people, like that's one of your strengths, then yeah, it's a tough sell. Like usually it's a combination of being more evidence-based plus a plethora of other things. And yeah, like you said earlier about being yourself, I think it's just like no one can compete with being you. Right. That's kind of the thing, is like no one compete, like you're one of one, and use that as your advantage. That's your unique selling point.
Exactly. Yeah. People buy coaches, not coaching, that's a nugget to take away for sure. For sure. And the thing is, just going back to Matt as an example, like, or just anybody, when you lean into your authenticity, it's automatically going to turn people off, some people off. That's kind of the whole point. Like that comes with, not say turning people on because of the connotation, but that like connecting with people on that level where, like using Matt's example of like, oh, you also love stand-up comedy and you're in that scene. Like now I have a closer connection with you because we're now relating on this other level. That's really powerful. I did that with chess recently. Like I started to get into chess. I was on a networking call with somebody. He also loves chess. And now we're quite close. And our relationships has extend beyond business. And all because we've related to just something that we're both interested in life. And obviously you don't have to build these, like, I'm going to talk to these people every week and like build friendships. You don't necessarily do that, but helping people see the real you opens the door to people connecting with you. And to a degree that is helpful. And it moves the needle for people. I mean, it really does. Like, he's a copywriter, this guy that I'm talking about. I'll go to him before I go to other people because of how we've connected outside of the business world. It translates to every aspect of life. So before we dive into some examples, Matt, I want to really quickly touch on the depth versus width.
Oh yeah.
Piece here.
Yeah, absolutely. So depth versus width is something that I heard first from Gary Vaynerchuk, entrepreneur.
Oh, is this a Gary V thing? I didn't even realize.
It's Gary V thing. And depth versus width is just, it's talking about the impact that you're trying to make. So are you trying to go wide? So are you trying to attract a bunch of new followers and new eyeballs? And you are going to, post a meme, or you're going to post, this could even be like a shirtless picture or something like that, right? Because that can show up on the explore page. People can like your physique. They can go to your page and they can see it. This can be a tweet or something, right? So memes, tweets, a lot of text-based carousels, 4 ways to do X, Y, and Z, right? Those are also going to be very shareable. And so width means you're trying to get as many eyeballs on the post as possible. And so think about viral content, that kind of stuff. That's typically going to follow under width. And so whenever you're first starting out, whenever you're trying to grow your audience, it makes sense that the ratio of width to depth will probably lean more towards going for wider posts so that you can reach more people, since you don't have that big of a following in the first place. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't also focus on depth, which just means you go very deep with the people who already follow you. And so this is like telling stories about yourself, right? This can be posting, a throwback Thursday or something, right? Like a picture of you as a child isn't going to do anything for new followers or anything like that. However, the people that already really like you, they're going to learn more about, how your love for fitness started whenever you were younger or something, right? Or started with high school football or whatever it is, or going deep in the sense of your storytelling about your life, like what you did over the past week or 2 weeks. You went on a trip, how you handled that trip, like vlogging something about your trip. That's going very deep with the people that already follow you. And this is where actually you probably are going to convert the most, because most people aren't going to, well, this is why actually it's good to have both, because if you're just posting a bunch of width posts, it's like then they'll follow you, and then maybe there's not enough stuff. If every single post of yours is just like a text or something, right? It's like they may not really, especially whenever you're a coach, for example, they're not going to really get an idea of who you are as a person. And again, if you have really good information, if you're a PhD, if you're a really good writer, whatever it is, if you're very, very persuasive, this route can work. But for most people, you're going to have a little bit of both. So the idea is potentially if you post a width post and you have a bunch of eyeballs, then they come to your Instagram page, for example, and then you're going to have a library of work. This doesn't mean that your grid has to be super pretty or something like that, but then you think of your social media as like a landing page, right? And so then they can go on your page and they can look at all these other posts, right? And then they can click on some other depth posts and they can learn more about you, right? They can learn more about your coaching philosophies or what you believe in. And then, then they'll end up signing up with you because they were able to go a little bit deeper with you. So width would be, think of more like TikTok, and then depth would be more of like a podcast, right? Like you're going to hang out, if you're hanging out on podcast for 3 hours, you're going to get to know somebody much more than you are with a quick 60-second TikTok. But it's good to have a combination of both. And so, that's essentially just.
That's such a good way. It's like the headline versus the article.
Yeah.
Everyone shares the headline.
Yes.
But the article is what provides it's what actually say it's what actually forms opinions. It's not in reality with that specific example.
Well,
but,
it should. That's how
it should be.
Yes.
And when it comes to getting to know you as a person, it's exactly how it goes. And if it's only width, then how people see you as a person is probably, because they're still gonna not judge, but they're still gonna identify you and label you. And think about you in a certain way.
If you're a meme page or something, or if you're like Complex or ESPN or something, it's like, then all you're going to do is post width posts. You're just going to post things that are trying to be sensationalist. You're trying to get headlines. You're trying to get more eyeballs on you over and over and over again. But whenever you're a coach, right, it's like they're going to buy coaches, not coaching. So you need to do some storytelling about yourself. And you need to go deep, and you need to talk about why you love knitting, every Thursday.
Yes.
Why I love going to get bagels every weekend. It's just like a tradition I've been doing for years, and
then draw it out and apply it to what other people do. Don't be afraid, lean into enjoyment. And even if something isn't perfectly healthy, if you enjoy it, that's the takeaway. It's not the ultimate takeaway. It's not that you love bagels, there should be one more step.
Yeah, of course. Exactly. That's exactly correct.
But sorry to cut you off there, but
no, that's it.
So I wanted to pause here before we look into a couple, because we talked about some different types of posts. Matt does these very well, and I sort of want to break them down a little bit.
Yeah. So with all client testimonials, I'm just trying to tell a story of the person. I'm just trying to tell the story of what they were doing beforehand, what they were struggling with, and then what we worked through together, and then where they are now. Like that's essentially it. I'm trying to get those, besides obviously the eye-catching transformation itself. Transformations, it's just like nobody really wants to look at those unless they're incredible. So it's just like, I'm just trying to figure out how can I catch people's attention the most possible. And so I keep it very simple. I keep it very I keep it pretty minimal. But then in the caption is where I really tell a story. But even in this one, you can see, so on the first slide, I say how it started. And then this goes over all the things that Kyle there did not do before he worked with me, and kind of the reasons he was wanting to come work with me in the first place. And then on the next slide, I go over kind of how it ended, and I go through everything that we accomplished during our time together. So basically, it's just like, even if they didn't read anything in the caption, they're going to be able to understand most of it through the carousel. Or if they read both, then it's going to be even better, right? And so yeah, that's usually how I go with testimonials. It's just like, tell the story of the client, make them the hero, highlight them. Don't talk about even, I mean, you can say, you know, them hyping you up or whatever, like if that's in the testimonial, like that's fine. But remember, you're not highlighting why you're so great. You're highlighting what they overcame and how they can be relatable to somebody who is looking at that post in the first place, right? And so I think that, like, when in the how it started right there, all those points, it's like, I want them to look at those points and be like, oh, that sounds a lot like me, right? Yes. And then that's going to incentivize them to then go and sign up with me.
And by the way, what a great way to show prospects back to like, do you get it? What a great way to show people you get it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's it with the client testimonials. And then so a reel, for any type of reel that I post, is usually going to be more of a width post, right? So that's why this one was a certain exercise that I was doing. And it was a kind of uncommon exercise that I hadn't seen before very often. And it also aligned with my type of clientele. You know, this was a more athletic move. This was like a three-way lunge, I believe. Or no, it was a step through lunge, which is still fairly difficult for most. And so that's going to lean more towards an intermediate to an advanced lifter, right? Somebody who's just getting started in the weights, they're not going to look at that step through lunge and be like, oh, I'm going to try and knock that out today, right? So I'm appealing also to my audience and to the people who are going to potentially work with me. And then it's going to be a width post because I'm trying to appeal to as many people as possible. Like, that's something that could be shared. That's something that people could see on the Explore page and just be like, oh, I really like that exercise. I want to give that exercise a try. This is why people do that with workouts and stuff too, you know? And then I try and make the key points, as you can see there with the check marks, like those are the big bullets that I want people to watch. Again, if they don't read anything in the caption, they should get the gist of it through just the video alone, but then obviously go a little bit more in depth into the caption too.
And then when you go into the caption, he educates through his own experience. You know, I know I'm one to fall into the trap of lazy leg. It's coming from documenting and showcasing his own experiences to then educate people.
Yeah. You know what? It's interesting. This is a big shift, and we have a question too, which I want to answer that in a second. But this is a big shift in how I've posted here recently, and it's leaning away from like and Alex, whenever you talked about this too, it really rung a bell with me because you were like, I don't like being told what to do. And after you said that, it started ringing with me too. It's not like, sometimes I think that can work for me. Again, depending on who's telling me to do it. If I really look up to them and things, that's different. But for the most part, I'm not trying to tell anybody to do anything, you know, like you should work harder. You need to get up and try this exercise. Like you need to do this, you need to do that. It's more so I'm saying like, hey, this is what I discovered through my own experience or through my client's experience. Of course, I can do that strategically and talk about my client's experience and my own experience and things like that. But I'm more so just like, hey, this went super well for me. Here's how I did it. Here's the results that I got. If you want to, you should try it too. It's not like, you're messing up your entire fitness routine because you're doing this instead of this. It's like, no, this is just what works for me. Maybe it'll work for you too if you check this box, right? It's a whole different reframe. And I think a lot of people, because it's hard whenever you see, that's why these like motivational people don't work. But whenever they have nobody, why should they listen to you? You know, it's like, that's why you have, you know, why motivational stuff works for Tony Robbins, because he's Tony Robbins, you know, it's like, because he's built an empire over years and years and years, right? Your opinion on it is doesn't matter. It's just like, he has clearly have the evidence of a lot of that stuff. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily right or wrong, but it's more so like it at least gives him the validity to talk about it in that way, at least to me. Like that's how I view it. So I think going from it more of like, hey, maybe you should try this. I've been doing this. Maybe it'll help you too. I think is a big way that you can shift how you talk about your content.
Hey, this worked for my client. The bulk of the post is I'm going to document exactly their story. And then at the end, it's, hey, consider this for yourself too. I mean, it's such a good shift, such a good shift.
And then the question that we had, I believe the name is Jerry. Sorry if I pronounced it wrong. They said, how do you build followers from scratch? Hashtags, what's the trick? I post a lot of relevant content, but my followers are slow to come on board. Yeah, I mean, that's going to be that's also another very long conversation. But I think, again, it's starting with your strengths. It's starting with your curiosities. It's starting with what's fun. And just getting going. Like, you just have to get going. Like, I'm going to go check real quick. I posted 1,633 times. So it's like, not to like dishearten you or anything, but it's also like, you have to keep posting so that you can get better at it. And I think you're also asking the wrong question, because you're asking, how do I build followers? And it's more so like, I think building followers is fine, but it's more so like, how do I build the right followers that then can lead to being customers? Because that's what you're trying to do, right? You're not trying to build followers, you're trying to get more customers. And so that's an entirely different conversation altogether. I think getting followers and things is obviously going to give you those new eyeballs, and you're going to be able to convert a certain percentage of those people into customers, ideally. But make sure you're asking the right question, and you have that in the back of your mind. And this goes back to part of the depth first width. You want to go way more width. You want to try and post reels. You want to get better at creating content. That's what I would say, is like, get better at it. Like your captions, your lighting, your storytelling, your camera angles, like the ideas themselves, conveying those ideas, making sure that you're not stuttering, making sure that you're getting to the point, making sure that they're not overly complicated. You're not talking about too many things at once, you know? So I would say, like, get better at creating content. And I think that will be a huge help too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, that's the algorithms on these platforms reward good content that keep people on the platform. So I think that's one, like, focusing on width posts for sure. I mean, it's building followers from scratch is not easy, right? I mean, especially, and I'll offer a slightly different perspective, which is more in line with me, because I'm how I tend to go about things and get clients. And I agree fully with what Matt said. Another route potentially, especially if you're like starting from scratch on social and you want to build, you might consistently post content, but try to drive people there via other ways than social. You know, I think that's also another option. Getting in front of other people's audiences is a really good, like, fast. I mean, it is fast. It's a quick way to get in front of people who there's already like trust that's built in. And so if there's opportunities to, you know, I'm thinking things like guest appearances, whether it's like offer to write guest posts for people, give free workshops, get creative with social too, run live coaching sessions every Thursday. You know, you might have 4 people that join for 3 months, but then maybe one person posts about it once, and now you get 11 people joining one week. And then the next week it's 12, and the next week it's 6. But then you look at the trend over a year, you started at 3 and now you average 26. That's good.
I think doing that strategically with other coaches is strategic as well, right? Like, constantly trying to network with other coaches who maybe have slightly more following than you. It's like, ask if they're doing the same type of content that you're doing. It's like, hey, let's do a joint live this Thursday and combine our audiences. And if you have 100 followers and they have 200 followers, it's still going to be better than nothing, right? And then you can cross-pollinate audiences that way.
Totally.
Doing that with a different person every single week or multiple times a week, however many times you can really do it, you know? And then you can chop that up. If you have another camera on you, you can chop that up and put that into content. Again, doing a thing one time and then posting it several other times. That's kind of the idea, is that if you have an hour live session with this other person, it's like maybe you can chop that up and put that video on your feed, and then you can chop it up into clips. You can turn that into an email. You can turn that into a tweet, right? It's like there, or you can turn that into something on your stories. I think that's part of it for sure.
And it's one of the, like, it's the double-edged sword with being consistent when you're not seeing like when the follower count is slow, you know. But I think where the consistency, yes, it absolutely does help you get followers from social media, but also when people do discover you, it provides them an ecosystem to come into that will then nurture them and build further relationships with them. So that every single like brand new eyeball that like you get in front of, like even if it's 2 people, 6 people, if that's happening on a consistent basis, that really compounds and adds up. And when you're posting consistently and providing value, and someone sees something from you from a co-live or whatever it may be, and they think, yeah, that's interesting, I'll follow, they're automatically going to be put into this ecosystem of value in a community already. And I think that's really powerful too. It's another reason to like stay consistent, even though you're not getting a ton of engagement. Also, people are probably watching more than you think they are. That's a very common thing that we say to our people all the time, especially when someone will be like, I got a client and he said that he'd been looking at my post for 6 months and I never heard from him. You know, like that's very common.
Yeah.
And so you never know who's looking to, but it's hard. It's hard. It's not easy.
I think because their other second part of that question is, do you guys cold call, cold message, or only engage with people that reach out to you first? I would, if I was first starting out, it's like, I am going to be, so you do a live with another person, there's 20 people total that join that live. You better be messaging every single person that joined and thanking them for joining and asking them if they have any other questions. That's 20 permission slips, right there, to at least be like, hey, you can drop in and say, thank you for joining the live. Do you have any other questions, right? And make it an open-ended question so that you can potentially start a conversation and you can get the ball rolling. Like that's not a cold sales call or a sales DM. It's like they're interested clearly in what you're doing. You may reach out to 20 people and 3 only respond back, but that's 3 more than what you were doing, right? And that doesn't mean that those other 17 that didn't respond won't then think of you in 6 months from now after they follow you for that 6-month period. And then they're like, oh, now I want a fitness coach. I'm going to go to Jerry, right? Like I'm going to go to that other person because they've been reaching out to me. They've been interested in me. And so if anybody also follows you from the other person's live, right? Go and thank them. Anybody that follows you, go and thank them. Like that's the thing that you have, the thing that you have over people with bigger audiences is you can go deep with those people. And it's like, that's something that can go a long way whenever you're first starting out and you only have a couple hundred followers. It's like, you need to get personal with every single one of them. And that's basically like cold call. It's basically like cold calling, but also the more it's even warmer than that because they decided to follow you. They also joined the live. They joined from your reel, whatever it is, I think that's huge.
And we're not trying to sell. That's not the goal. Like we're not reaching out to these people saying, thanks for joining the live. Here's my coaching application if you want. No, we're reaching out with curiosity. We're reaching out saying, thank you so much for joining our live. Like Matt said, if you have any other questions, just let me know. My door's open.
Which part resonated the most with you?
Totally.
That's it. Like that's where you get the ball rolling. Like you just ask them a question. And that's not trying to sell them. That's just asking them what their favorite part was. And then you can iterate that in a post later on, something like that.
Exactly. We got into this in our sales webinar last week, but it's like selling is simply solving problems, solving known problems. It's not necessarily our job to push people. And like when I think of cold calls, I think of like you're calling people cold and being like, do you have time to talk about this thing that I'm trying to sell you right off the bat? Right. That approach is very challenging. And I'm sure we've all gotten the messages. Do you want to grow your fitness business? Do you want to do this? Like we don't often recommend that approach. It's very, very tough. But when, like Matt just said, if someone like likes your content, they're obviously engaged to a certain degree. We don't have to feel bad about trying to have an interaction with them. And again, how we're viewing it is it's very important. We're not trying to sell this person. We're literally just trying to open the door and have a conversation. And if they're not down for that, then that's of course totally fine. But I think you'll find that most people are open, especially when they don't get this sense of like, oh God, this person's trying to sell me something. Like, we really can't be feeling like that when we're reaching out. There's people that buy services from me years after I have conversations with them because I'm top of mind. And when they're ready, I'm who they reach out to. And like actually caring about people and being social helps build that quite a bit. That was a long-winded answer, but all right, let's quickly run through these last two, Matt, to kind of like round up the two sort of buckets of post. One being like highlighting the non-fitness personality, and then one being like how other like a straight like pitch, which should be included in your content. Like, we don't want to pitch too much, but people should know how to move forward with us if they want to move forward with us. And we don't have to shy away from pitching. Should be the minority of our content. Yeah. Because all we do is pitch, then why would people care about what we have to say? But it should be worked in. So Matt, go ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the one with the glasses is a prime example of like a depth post. So you can even see in the very first sentence, I'm starting a story. And it's like some people may see that on the explore page or something and decide to follow me, but it's like, for the most part, this is for the audience that's already following me. And I want to build more depth with them.
And funny enough, this got more engagement than like a post that was designed to be with,
for sure.
Which can happen, of course. But I think a part of that is because I'm sure this did resonate with people outside of your audience and resonated with your audience even more than this or this post would.
1000%. Because again, it's more like, it's going to depend. They're each tools. And I think that it's not looking at it from a singular post perspective, but more so as a full library, right? Because then somebody lands on my page from the next reel that I post that does crush. And then they come and they look and they see the picture of the sunglasses. And they're like, oh, cool. They're like, that's a cool story, but I wonder if he actually knows what he's talking about. Then they go to the video with the exercise and they're like, okay, dope. Like, I like this exercise. That's unique, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. I show my expertise in other areas. I also give some insight into who I am as well. And then, on the other side, I do think it's important to do a call to action. And again, like Alex said, doing this all the time is not, well, here's the thing. I think that you can do a call to action in every single post. However, how intensely you pitch, or like what's the ratio of value to pitch, right? If you're constantly just pitching your coaching and being like, here's what you get this, this, and this, and I'm so great, and look at my clients and this. It's like they're going to tune you out because there's no value involved in that. And so instead, what I would do is I would create a really high value post. And then at the very end of it, right, then I'm like, also, if you want to work together, I do have this coaching service. And I think something just as subtle as that, that's not going to deter me from getting this value out of that post. It's just like, I'm just not going to do the call to action. Or if it does fit, I am going to take the call to action. But I think that you have to earn the right to make that small pitch. And I think that in most of your posts, you should definitely be providing value. And then also in that providing value, you relate to how that idea relates to your clients. Like why does that high protein breakfast, why is that a good idea? Like, how have you known that works with your clients, or whatever tip it is that you have for that you're posting? And so I think that that's something that a lot of people end up missing, is they're just like, here's free value, instead of putting it through the lens of their ideal client. And now, of course, that's not always going to be as direct as saying, I used this on a client the other day and did X, Y, and Z. It can be something more relatable, actually, like in that story that I have with the sunglasses on. It's like people can read through that and they can relate to me in that way. And then that can get them to sign up for coaching, right? Because they can see something that resonated with me and a lesson that I learned. And they're like, oh, I also, I have been struggling with that too. Relatability. That's the thing that puts them over the edge to sign up with me as a coach.
Yeah. They're like, oh, Matt's a real person. Got it.
Yeah, exactly. And then just giving them just that little nudge at the very end. That can be good. Just telling them what to do next, telling them to comment or asking them a question. Or
yeah,
you don't have to do it every single post, but I do think that if you get the question sometimes like, hey, do you do coaching? It's like, that's a big sign that you're probably not pitching enough.
You got to make it more clear.
You also you can't be afraid to pitch either. I think that goes both ways. But again, I think if you lead with value first, then you can't go wrong.
And also it's just like, I don't know with this post, but I would confidently wager that there's not a CTA at the end that's like, by the way, I also accept clients. Like that would not align with the value that this post is giving. Maybe the call to action is like, try to take a step towards something you enjoy, or try to learn you find, like that could be a call to action. Yeah. But it's not going to be sign on and work with me. No. Because that's unaligned.
No, I agree. The call to action could just be the application of that. Or I know the call to action is going to be something inspirational from the post or whatever. Or again, it's just like, I want that to be a pure value post, because if I added the call to action, it would actually take away from the post.
Yes. Because then people are saying, oh, those were his motives. Got it. Like, oh, he just wanted to sell me. Okay. Like consumers are pretty smart these days, guys. Absolutely. We can't really bait and switch. We can't really fool people. Let's just be honest, transparent. Cool. Thanks for doing that, Matt.
Absolutely.
I'm not even going to go into types of content because we've talked about that. Doesn't matter. It does, but
pick one and run with it.
Pick one and run with it. Let's briefly talk about, okay, things aren't working. What levers might you be, what filters could you look through to be sure that you're doing what you can? And again, we've talked about these mostly, so I'm not going to spend a ridiculous amount of time on them, but are you engaging with people? Is your content leading to actual conversations with people? If not, that's the first thing to fix. If you have 2 people liking your post, that should be 2 conversations. And again, not sales conversations, just curiosity-driven conversations. Literally just like human conversations. It's not like, let's hope they buy from me. That should be a byproduct of the conversation. Have you been consistent long enough? Again, like fitness, a week, a month, it's really tough to draw conclusions. You can certainly draw some, no question, but to draw massive conclusions, after a few weeks on a program, be like, this whole program's wrong. I got to start over. Tough to know if that's actually the case, and a few weeks in this world is pretty long, so make sure that, I always think about that image of the miner getting close to the diamonds and then he quits as soon as he gives up, like that. I think that happens a lot in this world, and why we like to focus on enjoyment. So you can keep going, because if you stop, that's the guaranteed way to know that you won't reach the goal. If you keep going, you're still on the path. Whoops. And then lastly, are you pulling enough levers? Are you staying in one lane where you're posting the same exact types of content over and over and drawing conclusions from that? Or are we utilizing all the different levers that we can pull to see what resonates and what doesn't? Don't get too wrapped up in a single post. Don't even shoo away an idea before you've tried to approach it from a couple different angles. So be sure you're engaging with people, staying consistent, and not being afraid to do something that doesn't work or doesn't resonate, because that's how you learn. And you also want to continually evolve, right? I mean, the value of trial and error is learning what works and then refining the approach. So you shouldn't necessarily, I mean, you're kind of in a constant state of trial and error. Life is kind of a constant state of trial and error, but the value of it is when you use the insights to change. Well, hope you enjoyed this, guys. Hope it was helpful. As always, any like suggestions for future topics, our doors are open. And talk soon.
See you guys. Thanks, everyone.
As always, thanks for listening to the Certified Personal Trainer Podcast. You can learn more about Fitness Mentors at fitnessmentors.com. Be sure to share this podcast on social media. And remember, we are here to help you succeed.